Welcome to episode 120, Managing a Remote International Team. Patrick, let's get to it. I think you have some interpreter baseball news.
Oh, yes. Not the story we've been talking about most often with Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, but we recently found a story that said the Cubs let go Seiya Suzuki's interpreter, which was interesting. And then kind of my first question was, okay, who's going to interpret for him now? And the Cubs have another Japanese player, Shota Imanaga, who has an interpreter. So now Shota's interpreter will be working double duty, basically. So interested to see if any more details come out about why they released Seiya Suzuki's interpreter. But interesting now that they basically have one person pulling double duty and working two jobs. So I hope he got a nice pay bump for taking on the extra work.
I mean, it just seems kind of crazy, right? Like the whole idea is that they have the ability to communicate with any of their teammates or the press or the media or the coaching staff at any time. Well, how does one guy cover two people? I don't get it.
Yeah, especially in that setting, it's hard to be in two places at once. It's not a remote gig. You have to be there in person.
Yeah, it just seems odd to me. But I mean, whatever. I guess anything now around an interpreter and one of the Japanese players is immediately we're going to think like a gambling scandal or something crazy like that. I
That's
guess.
the article I was reading said it had no nefarious motives or any pending lawsuits going on in the background. It just seemed like a business decision at this point.
Yeah, almost. There was that one line in there that I thought was really interesting. It said, "Well, we thought that which one did they think was acclimating better? I forget. Was it Shota or Seiya? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
So they said, well, this one is doing so much better. So we feel like the interpreter is really helping them acclimate. So we want to replicate that with the other player. And I thought, okay, all right, well, maybe that's the reason. Who knows?
Yeah.
To be seen. But cool to have both of those guys with the Cubs. Though Seiya has a hard time with just a standard fly ball. I don't understand that. Maybe
That's
could help him.
I am excited. I know they announced recently too that the Cubs will be opening the season next year in Japan against the Dodgers for a Tokyo
cool.
series. So
oh my gosh.
yeah, those two teams have the four highest profile Japanese players in the U.S. So it'll be cool to see them go back home and get to play in front of those crowds.
Oh, that'll be an amazing game. That'd be fun to be at. All right, well, let's roll into our show, Patrick. So, admittedly, I have to say, Patrick did an amazing job on the show notes this week. Thank you, Patrick. The topic basically is about managing a remote international team, and I think it's interesting. And I wonder if a lot of companies have a similar experience to what we've had, because pre-pandemic, I would say we were very local. We were very much Milwaukee and Chicago in terms of our staff. At the time, we had our CTO who was in Australia, and we had one project manager in Argentina, but pretty much everybody was here. Then, we added a vendor manager in Italy, and we slowly started to add people, and then the pandemic happened. And it's just really interesting. It's just this weird combination of things, whether you're talking about acquisitions, the pandemic, the ability to find talent. And, we hired our first project manager, our second project manager abroad. Then we did an acquisition that brought in another project manager from abroad and an employee in Colorado. We changed our computing model, which I think maybe had a big deal to do with it as well. We went from very much desktop applications to more of virtual desktops. So, everybody now has basically a thin network machine that just logs into a virtual device, which is really nice. It's a lot less, when it works awesome. A lot less overhead in terms of, managing actual machines, because otherwise it was managing two machines per person. Now you're essentially only managing the one machine, and the virtual ones are just pieces of a server, right? It's really what it is. So I don't know, I think it's interesting, Patrick. You had mentioned, the discussion point was, is this strategy? I would love to say that this was part of an overarching strategy. Like, yes, we had this planned all along. We totally did not. That was
No,
not the case.
yeah, and I think though too, like what was helpful, I know I remember from my time there was, after a few months you had the option to do 1 day from home, and then after a year or so you had the option to do 2 days from home. So I think you kind of had a head start on the hybrid model, obviously, like working out some of the technology kinks along the way, whether it's having physical machines or virtual machines. But I think that's what the struggle was for a lot of people when the pandemic hit. It's like, oh crap, we're not set up to have people go remote. We're only set up for people to come in and sit at their desk and use their computer that's already there. So I think that was something that definitely helped as the pandemic came on, is like, okay, most people were already doing 2 days a week from home. So going to five, like, yes, it was a shift, but it wasn't as seismic as some of the other companies had to deal with when people were going in every day.
Yeah, I'm very thankful for that, Patrick. I had colleagues of mine, either in my Vistage group or just, friends through business, that used to pride themselves on remote. Huh, we don't do that. We are full time in the office every day. Everybody has to be here. They're very proud of that culture, and I get that. I certainly do. I think it is nice to have everyone here, but we did that as sort of just a little perk, especially because we had a lot of people that drove in from far. Heck, you were in the city, and Kimberly's way up north. I mean, we had people that drive pretty far distances, Mike. Out west. Those are all decent 45-minute drives without traffic, right? I mean, you get
Mm-hmm.
traffic, and it could be far worse. So it was a perk, but thank goodness for that, because so many companies struggled when things shut down during COVID. And I was talking to one of our IT folks, and at the time he was kind of a junior IT support person, and he said literally for 2 months he was working 18 hours a day. He'd have 5 laptops in front of him for a big corporation, setting them up for remote access, giving them their logins and credentials, stickering them, putting a letter together that said, hey, here's your credentials, blah, blah, blah. Um, Here's how you authenticate, shoving it in a box and stacking it up in a corner, and some other guy would come and ship them out. And he said he basically did that for 2 months straight, 18 hours a day, uh, formatting machines to get people to work remotely. So it's interesting, though, that when we can come back to that later, where the pendulum has swung. But I guess let's continue to work through that conversation. But so, then we did, another acquisition recently as well, and it brought, another Colorado employee. And actually now we have Pennsylvania as well. Didn't put that in the list, but it's Milwaukee, Chicago, Colorado, Connecticut, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And then, now we also have Chile, Peru. We're going to add Canada here really soon. And, we've expanded. It's 2 in Australia, 2 in Italy, 4 in Argentina, 2 in Chile, 1 in Peru, and it's going to be 1 in Canada pretty soon. Now, again, that's just our core staff, right? Our translators are all over the world, and there's
Mm-hmm.
about 350 of those folks. But this is speaking about specifically our core Argo staff. So it's expanded even more from then. So I think maybe now it's become more of a strategy. But there are some advantages. I mean, one of the things is you can get great talent. You can find really good talent, and you have to be honest. The salary in Argentina is different than the salary in California, say for a project manager, or in Chicago. And um, but I would tell you that, I mean, that's important, but it's not that important. Really, the big thing is being able to find talent, because hey, I'm looking for a good project manager with some experience, and they have to live in Chicago. Well, I mean, you've just really limited your scope, especially for something specific, right? It's translation is still pretty specific, and by way of industries it's certainly large, but there's not a million project managers running around uh, that have experience and have done this type of work. And now imagine that your agency's in, you know Waukesha, Wisconsin, or in, something that's, maybe a little more rural, or central Wisconsin, or rural New York. Well, now how are you going to find these folks? And remote, of course, opens up that door.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it before of kind of how the pendulum has swung. I think it went from every day in office to every day remote, and I think we've kind of settled in the middle of a hybrid. Seems to be, I would say, the uh, most frequent thing I see out there in any job openings. Is I would say most are saying hybrid just because that's what's going to attract the talent. They know that kind of the workforce coming up doesn't want to go in 5 days a week. Basically, I think that was pretty clear, but I think remote only also is kind of fading away too. Obviously, depending on your location and what a job you're looking at, but I think those opportunities are kind of drying up, and I think hybrid is really kind of the sweet spot and what we'll see a lot of in the next couple of years.
I think you're right, Patrick. I mean, even in our model, we're 1 day a week, so we're very hybrid, stilted towards remote, right? And even if you talk about the employees that we have in the area, I mean, that's down to about seven, out of 31. So it's a pretty small part of our team that can't even actually come in 1 day a week. So
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned commuting too. I know that's always a huge deal, but just from like an operations standpoint, think about it. If you have someone who needs to drive in an hour a day each way, let's call it conservatively, that's 8 hours or 10 hours a week that they're spending where they could be not necessarily even working, but just like mentally resetting or whatever it is, where they're not in this high stress situation of commuting. It just gives them that much more, I'll call it brain space to kind of do what they need to do.
well, I've often said that if you have conscientious, hardworking employees, I think it's a win-win. I really do, because they can flex their time a little bit, right? It's like, oh, I have to pick up my children from the bus stop. All right, well, I go pick up their kids from the bus stop for 30 minutes, but maybe their total workday gets longer, but they have these breaks in there where they're able to do some things that are really, really valuable for their family. Um, Now, there are people that take advantage of it, right? We've heard of all those things: quiet quitting, people working two jobs. Hey, I can work two full-time jobs. Nobody knows. I got two laptops up. I can do that. It's not a
We've
big
got a
deal.
good mouse jiggler or whatever those things are called.
Yes. Who was that recently? I read somewhere. It was some company busted an employee with a mouse jiggler. I guess they can figure that out. I guess if they monitor your desktop,
They
they can
can
just,
determine the pattern.
yeah, they can just see your mouse moving back and forth. It's like, oh, that looks like fun. Um, so, if you have those folks, well, it kind of breaks the model. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of companies push against the model. And, now there's people that are like, hey, you swipe my badge today and I'll swipe you. These big companies don't even know you're there.
Coffee badging.
Coffee badging. Yes, that's the term. So, there's people that do that as well, because they say, well, your badge has to get swiped twice a week. It's like, okay, well, so like if you have that sort of thing, well, you've sort of
Yeah,
lost, right?
I think the baseline is like you have to you have to still be like doing your job, and like if there's problems, I would say that's like the first thing people are going to look to is like, then that's kind of the next layer is like, okay, if you're not doing your job well, then like maybe some more of those restrictions go on. But I think like kind of my policy has been if you're getting your stuff done, like I don't care if you need to go, like you said, pick up your kids, take a long lunch, whatever it is, fill in the blank with whatever break you want to take. As long as all your stuff's getting done, that's what's most important.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think any corporation is going to measure their employees against a set of KPIs, and whether that's, dollars sold, dollars managed, tasks completed, whatever it might be. Um, One of the kind of making our win, we're going to come back to this, I'm sure, but one of the other advantages is, that you can cover more time zones, right? I think as part of it is if you have employees in different parts of the world, you've got people that are on managing projects for a longer time, which makes you more agile, which is really good.
I think, yeah, one key thing on that one is I think it can be a double edged sword of people feeling like they need to be online 24 hours a day. So I think kind of one, expectation setting, and then two, just kind of like setting personal boundaries, just to make sure like you're not overexerting people of like, oh, hey, you're in, the East Coast, you can be on for a few more hours than, maybe someone in Central or West Coast time. So that's really important too. I know, um, especially when I was PMing at Argo, like my schedule was basically 7 to 3 because I needed those few hours to catch Europe, and then I'd still have a few hours where the West Coast was online. So really making sure you're at least partially available for that, but I wasn't, necessarily working 8 to 8 to be online till the end of the West Coast business day. I just kind of, I had that timing in my mind of like, okay, West Coast is online. Like now is my time to get any info from that team that I might need.
Well, it gets really challenging, right? So I have friends of mine that work for, large enterprises that say have, their development resources, their technology resources on their tech campus in India. So their day does start like that. It starts at 8 a.m. because they have to have meetings with, folks East Coast, that extends through, and they're now starting to talk to West Coast. But then they have to stay online late, or they have to get up really early, like stupid early, uh, to have meetings with their counterparts in India. And that's hard, right? That's really hard. I think even if you do plan for breaks, that becomes very difficult. I mean, I know right now there's a fair amount of pressure on our CTO because he's managing a dev team that's, split between Australia and Italy. So he has to stay up late to get some FaceTime with our developer in Italy. And those are challenges that are really tough. And I think it all kind of dovetails back into that work-life balance. And I think early in the pandemic, I would say that none of us had anything to do. So I think a lot of us were working. And I remember thinking, man, this just isn't sustainable, right? Like a lot of our guys are just working all the time. Like this is not only are we all depressed because we can't go to movies, restaurants, shows, see friends, see family, but now we're just going to work all the time. Well, and thankfully I think that period lasted a very short period of time. But, I think overall for our company, I think I would say overall it's worked out really well. Others obviously don't think that because you hear in the news, right? Dell, Amazon, others saying, 5 days in the week. Too bad. That's what's going to be.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that all shakes out. I know I've seen a lot of articles recently that companies are cracking down on coffee badging. I mean, we'll see what comes of it, right? I mean, it seems like a lot of talk thus far. I haven't seen a whole ton of news of like people necessarily getting let go because they're like, no, I'm not coming back into the office. But I could see that becoming a thing in the next couple of months or years.
I can only comment on what I get to read, right? I don't know anybody who works at Walmart, but it's been, in the news a little bit that they have been eliminating positions that were previously full remote or whatever the case is. They're really trying to bring everyone in. I mean, I don't know. I think as a business owner, let's say that were to happen to us. It physically can't. Our people are all over the place. I can't tell the guys from Argentina, hey, hop on a plane. It's not right. It's not going to happen.
That's super commuting, right?
Super commuting. Though I'm super excited. A couple of our PMs are coming in October and going to work in the office for 3 days. It's more of leveraging some fun, and they're going to work for a couple of days, which is really nice. I love that. Appreciate it. But I just think that I just think you have to like present a business case, right? I think you would have to sit with your employees and say, well, here's why we want you in the office. Here's why it's better for you and better for us. If the answer just is that, I mean, because this is a tough conversation, right? Patrick, I don't trust you, so you need to come to the office 5 days a week. I mean, that's a tough conversation, right? I guess if that's really the reason, I guess you're better off just saying it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's a tough one. I mean, that's a tough conversation to have. I think business would do better to present the reason.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I know we've kind of talked about some of the upsides. What do you see as kind of some of the downsides
Yeah.
of having a hybrid or fully remote team?
Lack of collaboration. It's the obvious stuff, right? I mean, I can tell you just from a perspective of a few years ago in 2023, it was branded Argopalooza. Nowhere near as fun as Lollapalooza. At least there was less musical talent there. It was fun for me because it was great to have so many people in the office. And we had folks here from all over. It's 23 people. The level of collaboration that week and the team building, I mean, you just can't match that, right? That investment, I would do it 3 times over. Really great. Everybody enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. So I would say the lack of collaboration, feeling of team unity. I mean, I think it's undervalued. Like just coffee clutching, right? I think nobody uses that word anymore. But just having a chat with your colleagues, right? It's about your kids, your vacations, your trips, the ball games you've seen. Um, you can't. You gotta. That's what's lacking. I think this human interaction, because it's like, oh, I would love to just talk to Patrick. All right, let me fire up a
The
Teams call.
the
All right,
you missed the pop in.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, we try some of those things, and I think one of the things we're going to talk about is what are some of the things that people can do, and we have something called they're called friendly 15s. I like virtual coffee better, but basically,
We yeah we
do you
we
guys have
have
those
coffee.
too?
We call them coffee chats.
Yeah, you just we run an anonymizer on a list of people and uh, match 2 people up per month, and the only rule is, hey, just don't talk about work. Just have a conversation about vacations you're playing. We try to give topics as well every month, so that way, in case maybe people aren't as open to starting conversation with people they don't know that well. Um, so we do that. We do the fitness challenges, which are through Stride Kick, where we have like step challenges, and there's a certain group in the office that really likes that. Uh, we've got a couple like marathon level runners, and they're just kill everyone every month.
No, we have something too. We have we run Slack internally, and we have like obviously all of our project channels and all the work stuff, but then we have like a group of fun channels. So it's like fun movies or fun like music or fun video games. So it's just kind of like people have that outlet to be like, oh, I'm watching this show. Who else is watching it? And we can talk about it or things like that. So we have like the work section of Slack, and then we have like the fun section as well, so people can kind of have, like you said, those bonding things and chat about non-work related things in there.
That's really nice. That's actually a good idea. I might co-opt that one. Um, we have a book club running where we do a book club once a quarter, which is nice. And we use the Amazon bookshelf. So then we'll load the book in the bookshelf so people don't have to put any money out. If they're interested in reading it, we'll load it in the bookshelf and they can use it. Service day, I really like that. And we do that wherever you are. Basically, Argo is closed for the day. And those that are in this area, we do something together. Those that are not in our area, we just ask them to pick something, go volunteer somewhere. And we all post the pictures in Slack and talk about some of the things we did. So I like that because we're doing some good, and it's sort of a virtual team building event, which I like a lot.
And
So that's
that can
kind
even
of what we do.
be that can be like a recruiting tactic too, like in your job posting. It's like, hey, we're committed to service, and we back it up by giving everyone the day off from work, where you use that day to volunteer as well. So I think some of these things we're talking about, positive and negative. I mean, I think the generation entering the workforce, and this could be me making this up, but it feels like they're a lot more service oriented. So that's important to the workforce coming in. So I think that can only help that you have that.
I think they definitely, I would say that this generation coming in definitely wants to have some sense of mission, some sense of, hey, my corporate entity does some good as well as is really good at whatever business endeavor. I think that's really good. Um, One of the other challenges, Patrick, is IT challenges, right? You have to like change. We talked about how we had to change our infrastructure. There's good and bad, right? I mean, going to a virtual um, environment can save time and money on maintenance and responsibility of tracking another machine and My all-time favorite is when we were doing remote desktops is, one of the battery backups would fail or something like that. And, someone said, I can't log into my machine. Thank goodness I live really close to the office. So I was kind of in charge of that. Oh, let me run back to the office and see what's going on. Oh yeah, it's just a bad UPS, or the machine rebooted and never came back, or whatever it was. Like, none of that is really an issue anymore. Um, but I think performance tracking is a challenge. And I think maybe that's where a lot of companies are struggling is, if you're a project manager or a salesperson and you have a CRM that tracks what your activities are, well, that's easy enough. But, what if you're a marketing person, or what if where, the deliverables are softer deliverables, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm working on our analytics account, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing, those types of positions where the KPIs are harder, they're less linear. I think those are tougher.
Yeah, I mean that. I think that's harder even just outside of working remote or in person. It's just
Mm-hmm.
some job functions just have harder KPIs to track against, and you sometimes you might not see the fruits of the labor for weeks or months after it's already done.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the other big challenges is taxes and compliance. So, technically, some employees want to, they want to be employed rather than contracted. So, out of full disclosure, our employees that are abroad are essentially on contracts, because it's so difficult for a small organization like ours. Says, hey, we're going to have one employee in Peru. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to incorporate in Peru and we'll become an employer of record. And you can certainly outsource that. There's companies that will become sort of your shell company and you can be an employer of record, but um, it's very cost prohibitive. And the requirements are really crazy. Like, there's, especially like, I think we have really good things with Family Leave Act, and, the ability to the ability to take time when you need it, if you have a baby or there's death in the family, or all those extenuating circumstances. In other countries, the like, for example, you're having a child. I believe it's like a year in a lot of countries where you have to be able to hold the position for a year, get paid for a year. I mean, that on a small business, that could be really taxing, right? That could be really difficult to manage.
Yeah, I mean, think of just how many other countries you listed. I think you're at 4 or 5 or 6 countries outside of the U.S., and just knowing what the regulations even are in those areas is the first battle. I mean,
Exactly.
that's the joke of the U.S. tax code, right? It's if you took all 7 Harry Potter books and multiplied it by 10, that's how long it is to read the entire tax code of the U.S. It's like now multiply that by 6 countries, and that's your full time job is just reading what this is.
Absolutely. I mean, just keeping our employee handbook, we have a service that tells us every day, Patrick, I get a note, because we're in 7 or 8 states now. Every day I get a notice of a change of some law or rule in a given state, and we have to update our employee handbook. So imagine, now if we were an employer of record in those countries, we'd have to stay on top of their regulations. And you're absolutely right. It would be oppressive at a company our size. So I think it's better to manage those as a contract basis, and you have to make it, amenable for the employees as well. But you just have to be careful because, in a recent acquisition, that was an issue. There was an employee of record in a Scandinavian country, and it was pretty difficult to unwind that. That all needed to be unwound before we took over the company, and it was difficult. It was difficult to do that. So we covered a lot today, Patrick. I don't know that we solved anyone's problems. I hope we did, relative to, at least we gave them some pitfalls and some positives as well. What's your biggest takeaway?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, having a hybrid or fully remote team is, I don't want to say a gamble, but it comes with inherent risk just because it just does. So I think if you have good people, that risk is a lot smaller, and then that kind of bubbles any issues to the top very quickly. I think you can quickly find issues in that type of environment. So I think, like you said, it comes down to trust and just making sure like people are doing what they should be doing. And that's not always going to be the case. And I think there's going to be some growing pains kind of just workforce wide of people who are trying to game the system and kind of get caught, and that's it.
Absolutely. My biggest takeaway, I guess for me, it's that ability of a company to find talent wherever it lives, right? I think it's a game changer I mean, I think of when we started almost 30 years ago now. There's no way in hell you could make this work. It just couldn't work. The phone systems weren't there, right? I mean, our guys that are all over the world essentially have 847 numbers, right? They have numbers in our zip code through their app. I can message them. I can, internally as if they were sitting in the office next to me. No way that was happening. Distributed computing didn't exist. Hell, the internet didn't exist, right? Email didn't exist when we started. So, the technology has come so far to allow for all of this. So that's my biggest takeaway is that I think I'd rather focus on the positive and say that, hey, you can find talent wherever it lives.
Awesome.
Well, for this episode of Translation Confidential, this is Peter and Patrick signing off.